I'm Francis Durnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, after a new report finds Russian forces have gained 0.038 square kilometres of territory for every soldier it's lost since July 2024, we look at the significance of new announcements by Ukraine's allies in Rome and London, and discuss the Ukrainian theory of victory.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Friday, the 8th of July, 3 years and 138 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, I'm joined by our Associate Editor of Defence, Dominic Nicholls, journalist and narrative podcast producer Adelie Pochman-Ponte, and later you'll hear Roland Oliphant sit down with Alina Frolova, the Deputy Chairman of the Centre for Defence Strategies. First, though, over to Dom for the latest military updates.
Let's start in Russia. Drone attacks reported this morning near a Russian oil depot and multiple defence industrial facilities, including a MiG jet fighter production plant, all near Moscow. Now, Russia's defence ministry says its forces shot down 155 Ukrainian drones overnight, including 53 over Kursk Oblast, obviously just to the north of Ukraine, and 13 over Tula Oblast, that's to the south of Moscow. Now, residents of Tula reported explosions in the city's industrial Politarsky district overnight. There are 3 major defence industrial facilities there. They've all been previously targeted in drone strikes over the recent months. Tula Oblast Governor Dmitry Milyev reported 1 person killed and another injured, although gave no details about that or any potential damage. Now, in Moscow Oblast, residents of the Lukhovitsky town, that's about 100 k's southeast of the capital, reported a drone attack near the local aviation plant and oil depot. This comes from independent Russian news outlet Astra. Now, the Lukhovitsky aviation plant produces MiG-29 jets and MiG-31 jets as well. They fire the Kinzhal big missiles. They're both warplanes used by Russian forces in Ukraine. MiG being the manufacturer, the Mikoyan Gurevich factory. Elsewhere in the region, drones reportedly attacked the Kronstadt drone factory in Dubna. That's about 100 k's north of Moscow, a facility previously targeted by Ukraine in May. Now, no further details on either of those given by Moscow Oblast Governor Andrei Vorobyov or Russia's defense ministry, but Russian authorities have reported injuries in other regions across the country as a result of Ukrainian drone attacks, including 4 allegedly wounded in Kursk Oblast. Now, into Ukraine, Russia has made a small advance of about a kilometre in the vicinity of Poltavka. That's roughly halfway between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka in the Donbass. They made a similar advance around the village of Tolstoy. That village, I think, seems to have been taken by Russian forces. They seem to have pushed north for a few hundred metres up the road from there. Now, that area is the bulge of the Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast borders. This is about 40 k's southwest of Pokrovsk. So don't think Russian forces have got into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast yet, but they're filling out that bit along the line of the river that runs northwest along the border between the 2 oblasts there. Now, this week, The Economist published an article that said it would take Russia about 89 years to seize all of Ukraine at its current, albeit relatively accelerated rate of advance. We know they've been prioritising the Donbass. They've been making gains there, as we have been reporting. And that's what some sources refer to when they say Russia is advancing at its fastest pace in years. You'll see that phrase around the bazaars. But I would just say that is being measured on a very narrow front, not across, obviously, the whole line across the whole country. So while some rates of advance in some areas of some of the front may be the fastest in years, it is still correct to say the amount of Ukrainian land taken by Russia is barely changing. Anyway, the Economist article says that Russia's summer 2025 offensive started on May the 1st, and they say they've seized an average of about 15 square kilometres a day since then. Now, that assessment is supported by the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War. They assess Russian forces seized just under 500 square kilometres in May, and a little bit less than that, I think about 466 from memory, in June. The Economist says at this rate of advance, it would take until February 2028 to seize the remainder of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast. Now, they obviously are areas that they are claiming today. They've repeatedly claimed that they've got the whole of those areas. There are also areas that Russia says should be handed over, including the parts of those oblasts that have never been held by Russian forces, as part of negotiations. Now, The Economist estimates Russia has suffered between 900,000 and 1.3 million personnel casualties since the start of the full-scale invasion, which includes between 190,000 and 350,000 killed in action. Now, those numbers, obviously 190, 350, almost double. So, as we always say, there's a lot of confusion here. It's very difficult to estimate casualties, but at any rate, those estimates by The Economist are absolutely staggering numbers. The Economist says that Russia has gained 0.038 square kilometres of territory, that's about 9 acres, for every soldier killed since around July last year. So to those that keep bashing me and saying each day there's not been much change in the lines and they've come at a huge cost, there's your evidence. Russia and, the Soviet Union before that, refers to soldiers killed in action as Cargo 200. You'll see the references across Telegram chats to 200s. It's the reference to how many people killed. So it's a bit clunky, but I wonder instead of saying 200s, they should refer to them as 0.038, because that's what they are giving up their lives for. Now, in Ukraine over the last 24 hours, 9 have been killed, at least 42 injured. 10 settlements in Kyiv Oblast were hit. There were deaths and injuries in Kharkiv city. Russian drones injured 9 people, including women in a maternity hospital and the associated medical facility there. President Zelensky said women in labour with children, women after surgery. Fortunately, there were no children among the victims. Russia targets life, even where it is just beginning. 7 people were killed in Donetsk Oblast, 3 in Pokrovsk, and 4 others across the rest of the region. 14 people injured in Kherson Oblast after Russia targeted 37 settlements yesterday, including the regional centre, the city. In Zaporizhia Oblast, a 48-year-old man suffered injuries in the Zaporizhia city, and Russian forces said to have launched 592 strikes across 16 areas in the oblast in the past day. That comes from the local military administration. And then just this morning, in the last couple of hours, I've seen reports of 8 people injured in attacks in Odessa. The strikes there have damaged residential and administrative buildings, civilian infrastructure, cars and a stable. There were horses killed and injured at the stable. No words if any of the surviving ones are going to be able to continue living. We send our love and support out to friends of ours we know have been impacted by those strikes in Odessa this morning. Now, just last for me, a few words on military and civilian aid. The United Nations Development Programme and the Norwegian government have launched a $200 million initiative aimed at bulking up, restoring and transforming Ukraine's energy sector. Now, this comes from Ukraine's energy minister speaking yesterday. This funding, which was unveiled in Rome at the Ukraine Recovery Conference, aims to address both the immediate needs and the long-term goals. According to the Energy Ministry, this is going to be used to restore heating and water services to millions of Ukrainians, particularly, and prioritising, I think, those in the frontline communities. Now, AP, the Associated Press and Reuters, both citing 2 US officials, say US military aid deliveries to Ukraine have started again. They didn't give any details on quantities or whether the weapon's already in country, but this shipment is said to include 155mm artillery shells and GMLRS rockets, the guided multiple launch rocket system. Now, the UK also yesterday signed an agreement for 5,000 air defence interceptors from Thales, or the Belfast-based Thales Air Defence. That's a subsidiary of the bigger French company Thales. The UK is also going to commit £283 million, that's just over $380 million, in bilateral assistance for Ukraine. That's not so much humanitarian, it seems more civil sector from what I can decipher. And then for the Czech government has approved a training programme for F-16 pilots. It's thought about 8 pilots are going to be provided, given about 150 hours of pilot training starting next year. That last report comes from the ISW. And just last for me, I'm seeing reports this morning from a number of social media channels that are reporting an AN-124 Ruslan aircraft, one of those massive cargo planes, was reportedly spotted flying over Kyiv today, which possibly, it's going to be the first time since 2022. You rarely see such planes. They are very large and hence comparatively slow moving. So I'm not sure really what to make of it. I mean, they wouldn't be flying there if there was any concern about Russian aircraft or anti-air capabilities. So I don't know if this is something very odd. I don't know if it shows confidence in Ukraine's air defence. If you're in Kyiv and if you saw this huge transport plane, do please let us know what you think. That's us up to date, Francis.
Thanks very much, Dom. You reference Rome there. Let's return to the Eternal City next, where the Ukraine Recovery Conference is still underway. There have been, as you say, several significant speeches, and further to that announcement from Zelensky, he was also urging yesterday for the adoption of a Marshall Plan-style strategy to help Ukraine recover, a term we've heard many times over the last few years. He said, rebuilding Ukraine is not just about our country. It's also about your countries, your companies, your technology, your jobs. And he emphasised the need for a coordinated international recovery coalition, insisting Kyiv would only welcome true partners, those who are not helping Russia continue this war. He also called, interestingly, for more active use of the $300 billion in frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine, urging further foreign investment in defensive technologies. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, hosting the conference this year, of course, said, "We can play this match and win it only if we manage to mobilise private capital, the entrepreneurial spirit of enterprises and their ability to attract investments." She announced that the gathering resulted in more than 10 billion euros in extra commitments towards Ukraine's reconstruction, though we're yet to see how those statistics have been broken down. Now, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz added to the call for solidarity, urging Trump to remain aligned with Europe in defending Ukraine. "Stay with us and stay with the Europeans," he said. "Stay with us on this side and on this page of our common history." He then criticised the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico for stalling that 18th package of EU sanctions against Russia, saying, "I urgently ask Slovakia and its Prime Minister to give up the resistance and to free the way." Now, interestingly, Fico pushed back later, saying, "We refuse to negotiate under the pressure of strong words," and stressed Slovakia's need for affordable energy supplies. We still await confirmation of reports that a deal has been reached behind closed doors. The major announcement at the conference was the European Flagship Fund for the Reconstruction of Ukraine, unveiled by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen yesterday, describing it as the largest equity fund globally to support reconstruction. It's aimed at spurring investment in areas such as energy, transport, critical raw materials and dual-use industries. Countries backing that fund include Italy, Germany, France, Poland and the European Investment Bank. And she concluded her remarks by saying, "The people of Ukraine are ready to drive their country's economy into the future. The time to invest is now." If you're at the conference and have any interesting snippets to offer from some of those fringe events, do let us know. We're already in touch with quite a few of you who are there. Or just feel free to send some pictures of ancient ruins as well. I'd like that. But just in terms of extra developments, the other, I think, significant story of the past 24 hours, further to the announcements made in London, which Adley will cover shortly, is that Trump has said he plans to make a major statement on Russia next week. Now, we've been here before, but he did renew his criticism of Putin in an interview with NBC, saying that weapons deliveries would be sent through members of the NATO alliance rather than directly from the US. He said, "I'm disappointed in Russia, but we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. I think I'll have a major statement to make on Russia on Monday." Now, whether or not that has any relation to the bipartisan bill which Trump has given the green light to be put to a vote in the Senate is unclear. Both Graham and Blumenthal met with Zelensky in Rome yesterday. But the fact is that that bill is speculated to be highly watered down, with many believing it will be a symbolic gesture rather than anything else. We shall see. One last story relating to the US before I hand over. According to Bloomberg, Zelensky is considering appointing Defence Minister Rustem Umerov as Ukraine's next ambassador to the US, as Zelensky confirmed plans to replace Ukraine's current ambassador in Washington, Oksana Makarova, who's held the post since 2021. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, Deputy Prime Minister Olya Stefanishnya and Energy Minister Herman Halushenko are also reported to be in the running. As the Kyiv Independent summarises, Umerov was appointed Defence Minister in September 2023. Prior to that, he served as a Member of Parliament, headed to the State Property Fund and was part of Ukraine's delegation to negotiations with Russia at the outset of the invasion. When direct talks between Kyiv and Moscow resumed in 2025, Umerov led the Ukrainian delegation in 2 rounds of negotiations. I should just say that's when we will have last been talking about him in detail on the podcast. At the beginning of the year, the Defence Ministry came under scrutiny as Umerov faced an investigation over his alleged abuse of power. Pro-reform MPs and anti-corruption activists criticised him for what they saw as efforts to destroy the independence of the Defence Procurement Agency, which was created in 2022 to make defence procurement more transparent and counter corruption. And I should add that quite a few Ukrainian voices I've spoken to in the last day or so have said that they are concerned about the prospect of this appointment because of the sensitivities relating to how corruption is perceived in the United States. It would make him an easy target. But more on that story as we have it. Now, over to Adley, who's going to update us on the outcome of Macron's state visit. There were some pretty significant announcements, Adley.
They were indeed. So I was at the NATO base in Northwood yesterday alongside the rest of the press pack from France and the UK, covering the press conference and the announcements on defence, the Coalition of the Willing and the Nuclear Cooperation, which I'll get into detail in a second. So to start with, Coalition of the Willing, or as everyone abbreviated it in their notebooks yesterday, COW. In the video call, there were US senators and Special Envoy General Kellogg for the first time. That was quite a significant development considering that the Coalition of the Willing has initially been a response to Trump pulling out of support for Ukraine earlier on this year. There were also 30 nations, including Zelensky, dialing in from Rome, as you just covered. So during the call, Starmer said that we should shift our focus in this group from preparing for peace to making it happen by forcing Putin on the table. And yet, all of the conversations and all of the announcements look at what would happen in the event of a ceasefire. So it's clear what the road to ceasefire is. Amongst the announcements, there was the launch of a multinational force Ukraine, which would involve mature operational plans to deploy a reassurance force once hostilities have ceased, the ceasefire, and to help secure Ukraine's skies and seas and regenerate Ukraine's armed forces, including by sending military officials from UK and France to train further Ukraine forces. But all of that is after the ceasefire, and there was no pathway for victory or a ceasefire announced yesterday at the press conference. Amongst the other announcements, the launch of a counter-shadow fleet partnership to crack down on dangerous Russian-backed vessels in the Channel and reduce Russian oil revenues via these vessels. And the announcement in order to institutionalize the Coalition of the Willing, and that is a big step towards making it more of an institution alongside other existing defense institutions, such as NATO, an already operational, I quote, HQ in Paris to support these operations and the peace deal when it starts. Again, the when here is crucial. With, according to Macron, his announcement, 200 military planning officials. And all of the headquarters should move to London after a year, which is in true fashion of bilateral European institutions, sharing the responsibility, ensuring the hosting of the operational headquarters. Some were sceptical of what the headquarters actually involved and entailed at this stage. Macron, during the call, said that we clearly need something new to step up the pressure on Russia, and the coordination of all sanction packages will be a game changer. So he's talking about the 18th packages of sanction in Europe and the sanctions that the US has again promised on Russia, in which is meant as yet another deterrent. All of this is a lot of announcements for things that are already existing and that have been happening for the last 3 years without a clear deterrence effect on Russia so far and without making Russia come to the table for negotiations. So it's both a lot of announcements and some very concrete plans, but equally, how is it very different to what we've seen in the last 3 years? In the short term, it's more about continuing to support Ukraine through weapons delivery than any ideas of boots on the ground. That has very much been rescinded. We're talking about military and financial support. Now, not part of COW, Coalition of the Willing, has been all of the defence announcements from increased cooperation between the UK and France. And it's really important to understand here that Macron stressed to reporters that besides the reassurance force, the announcements of the Coalition of the Willing was not part of the support to Ukraine. It's been pitched as a separate understanding. On the Northwood Declaration on increased nuclear cooperation, 3 elements were laid out by Macron in his speech. The reiteration of the nuclear doctrine established at Chequers in 1995 on the fact that the UK and France share joint vital interests between the two countries. An attack on one would be an attack on the other one. The cooperation of deterrence between the UK and France through the establishment of the Nuclear Steering Group that will coordinate policy, capability and operation. So it's a very big shift in terms of French nuclear policy, which has always been, as we've talked about before in this podcast, focused on independence from NATO. There has not been any announcements whether that would lead to an increased closeness between France and NATO on nuclear capabilities. Dom really wanted me to ask Macron whether he would declare his nuclear capabilities to NATO. I am sorry to disappoint. Not only did I not get a question, but also he did not say that in his speech. And they just zoomed away from the press conference, so I was not able to shout it as he was leaving the venue. So for the first time, the coordinating nuclear arsenal, they talked about any extreme threat to this continent would prompt a response from our two nations. That all depends on how you define extreme. And that is where the blur is. How do we define extreme? Is war in Ukraine extreme? Apparently not. Is constant aggression and the scaling up of aggression by Russia on Ukraine, on the European continent, extreme? Apparently not. How do we define that? That's going to be left for future policymakers to decide. In questions from reporters, the Prime Minister did not acknowledge one of the questions of what would happen if the UK were to become stuck between their two alliances, the US on one side and the French nuclear cooperation on the other. Other big defence announcements, the updates on the Lancaster House Treaty with the creation of the Combined Joint Force, which is an update on the existing Combined Joint Expeditionary Force in order to build a shared capability of sufficient scale for warfighting and ready to operate in all domains, including cyber and space in the defence of Europe. So that is bringing a brigade to core. It's up to 50,000 men, 5 times the number of existing men in the brigade. And it's been pitched in the speeches by Macron as reinforcing the European wing of NATO. So all of these announcements have really been pitched yesterday as reinforcing existing alliance, reinforcing cooperation, reinforcing NATO, the robustness of NATO in Europe through increased cooperation from the two nuclear powerhouses of Europe. It's not been pitched as something that is starting to create other alliances from NATO should the US pull out their support. I know some commentators have been optimistically talking about that, about maybe is that the draft blueprint for some later alliances, later institutions. That's not anything that's been conveyed in the press conference yesterday. Other announcement, cooperation on missile production, air-to-air missiles, surface-to-air missiles, and long-range cruise missiles. So, again, as I just mentioned, is it a way to work around existing institutions? Should they prove dysfunctional? Should they prove insufficient in order to fight for Ukraine or in the face of a future conflict? That's an optimistic take. Not that something like that has been mentioned yesterday at the press conferences. I just want to end on some other French military news. This morning, there was a speech from the head of the French army who spoke this morning on French TV, stressing that France in particular had been the target of a lot of Russian threats, which have been happening over the last few years through a lot of hybrid threats, including some proxy ones in the informational war where the French army is located, often coming into face with Russian paramilitary forces, especially in Africa. He quoted several events in the informational war over the last year. I don't know if you covered that in this podcast or if it's something that came up on a lot of our listeners' feeds on the internet, but there was a French flag that was burnt in Bangui a while ago, and as it was being burned, a Russian flag appeared. Some other informational wars that have been happening in the last year, and especially last summer around the Olympics in France, have been disinformation campaigns. There were, I don't know if you remember that, there were 5 coffins put at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower saying there were French soldiers fighting in Ukraine. They were full of plaster, and they've been linked to Bulgarian and Moldovan groups trying to create chaos in the informational war. And that also goes with other events that have happened in the last year of trying to use anti-Semitic campaigns in order to create division in France and the fault lines, all of which have been proven to be organized by Russia or Russian-linked groups. To finish on French military news, Macron will have a big defense speech on Sunday night, just the day before July 14th, the French National Day, where we will have the usual military parade. So big defense speech to look forward to on Sunday night. And in September, there will be an announcement after a review of the French National Service. And that's all from my update today from Northwood yesterday and on the French side of things. Thank you, Francis.
Well, thanks very much, Adley. It's been a hectic week for you. You had that trip to Palace of Westminster, waiting around for Mr. Macron, then trip up to Scarborough, and then back down for the speech by Macron and Starmer yesterday. So thanks very much for all of your efforts. Dom, you've listened to this. Where do you stand on some of those updates that were made? Are they up to snuff?
Well, just very briefly, if I may. So our American friends, when they are confronted with a load of words from officialdom that actually don't amount to a great hill of beans, call it a nothing burger. So listening to all that and stuff that came out yesterday, in the spirit of cross-channel diplomacy, I would not call it a nothing burger, but is it a pas de croissant? Would that be correct? If it's not a nothing burger, a pas de croissant. Anyway, I mean, when I used to write staff work, I used to go for the policy of never mind the quality, feel the width. As in just a load of words to try and get around the fact that I don't actually know what I'm talking about and what I'm writing doesn't really have a huge amount of substance. And I saw all that yesterday. Interesting stuff on the nuclear, although really, how big a shift is it? What possible threat could there be to the UK that might warrant a nuclear response that wouldn't also be a threat anyway to France? What possible threat could there be to France that might warrant a nuclear response that wouldn't also warrant something from the UK? And that was yesterday, before this great announcement. So what does this new nuclear sharing thing do? I don't really get that. The whole, we're going to open up the production lines for Storm Shadow / Scalp missiles. Yeah, brilliant. Should have done that a long time ago. And then all the rest of it. I mean, having this joint headquarters, there is the CJEF already, the Combined Joint Expeditionary Force, this military touch point between the UK and France. That exists already. So I don't know what this new thing is with the headquarters in Paris for the first year and then London for the next year. And that's all very nice. And this idea that this is going to help and reassure NATO. I mean, really? I mean, what are you saying to NATO? There's now another headquarters that's going to be doing stuff and populated with very eager staff officers beavering away, producing great reams of... I mean, what does it do for NATO? NATO's literally just updated all of its plans, its battle plans by geographic area and by domain, as in air, land, sea, cyber and space. So are we now just going to vomit this new headquarters thing into NATO's plans? Is Sakur going to turn around and go, oh, thanks, lads, there was one big point I was missing, and I just don't get it. So I come back to, this feels to me like, never mind the quality, feel the width, just a load of word salad that doesn't really amount to much. Bit of industrial cooperation, fantastic. The coalition of the willing, or the cow, whatever we're going to call it, thank God we're out of the days when we used to have the war against terror and the acronym SOUP and what have you. But, so whatever this thing is, it's just shielding the fact that there's nothing going on. I mean, what are you doing? Message me. What is happening? The good men and women who are going to have to produce all this staff work and work late and not have time with their families, producing staff work that goes nowhere. What do you think? Message me privately, get me on Signal, all the rest of it. I just think this is all heat and no light, or whatever the expression is. It's a nothing burger. It is a pas de croissant.
Well, thanks very much, Dom, for your candid reflections on those announcements yesterday. I know others have got a slightly more optimistic interpretation, but as ever, I think the devil will be in the details. Alina Frolova is the deputy head of the Centre for Defence Strategies. Formerly a Deputy Minister of Defence of Ukraine, an advisor to the Ministry of Defence and an advisor to the Ministry of Information Policy, she talks to Roland Oliphant about the Ukrainian theory of victory. This is their conversation.
Centre for Defence Strategies is, of course, listeners of the podcast will, I hope, be familiar with it because I lean on your daily updates quite a lot when I'm looking at kind of what's happening on the battlefield. So, and I've said it before, please keep doing that. It's a really useful resource.
Yeah, that's the Ukrainian think tank, which we created with the idea to have the dedicated focus on the security and defense. And that's actually what we do. We never put in efforts in building up some big organization, more about the quality of content which we do provide. And we do consult foreign governments sometimes. We try to create some kind of breakthrough strategies which will assist Ukraine in this war, especially after the full-scale invasion, when we dedicate a lot of time to advocacy and this focused area, then to any other activities.
Let's get to the meat of it then. I mean, you're in London. Is it fair to say a new theory of victory? And if I may just set up the question. I mean, the year began and there was an awful lot of talk of the war ending or pausing in 2025. And I remember back around New Year, Donald Trump was coming in and there was talk of, will there be a ceasefire? Will there be a summit? It looks now, especially after, and we are speaking on July the 4th, the night after this particularly huge attack on Kyiv, it looks like the war isn't going to stop, and instead of brokering a peace, America is just leaving the scene. So what's your answer? What does Ukraine do in this changed circumstance? If the assumption now is the war is not stopping this year, the war may go on for several more years, and America is no longer on the stage.
So actually, this theory which we tried now to promote, it's based on the idea that, yes, everyone believed in ceasefire. Frankly speaking, the serious Ukrainian experts, those who work in the field, they never believe in that.
You didn't believe it?
No. Because you see the preconditions and you do understand that there is no change of intention in Russian position, and actually ceasefire is mainly, or peace talks mainly depends on Russia, because Ukraine wants peace. Obviously, we don't want to peace on some very negative for Ukraine conditions, but we are ready to negotiate. And the president always demonstrated, not only demonstrate, but this is actual intention, because we want to end up this war. And Western countries, our partners, want peace, and everyone can influence just in limited capacity, and that Russia doesn't want. And we didn't see any preconditions for this peace because the situation, the non-change in position, all the other factors demonstrated that Russia has no intention to do that. So, of course, there were a little bit minor hope that probably Trump will use this like a force to implement it on Russia, and then Russia will have to go. But as we saw from the very beginning, Trump chose another strategy. So in some very short period it was clear, but still it were a lot of talks about that, especially among European politicians and our partners, because really it was the easy way to go. And I don't know why, but everyone just rely on the best variant, not the worst variant.
This was the assumption that...
Yes, that the ceasefire would be, or peace talks would be, or something that Putin will decide to stop, and Trump will solve, at least for some period, this issue and situation. It didn't happen, and as soon as there were no plan B, when all politicians already do understand that there would be no ceasefire, no one has an idea what to do next. And this phrase, as long as it takes, this actually demonstrates that there is no plan. Because as long as it takes, it's how many years? 100 years, 50 years? How you can allocate some kind of resources if you don't understand?
Isn't that kind of the problem all the way through? I've raised this many times on the podcast, this anecdote. Summer of 2022, I remember being in London, having a briefing with I could say very, very senior Western official who was in a position to know these things, trying to get a sense of what the Western strategy was for ending the war, and the answer basically comes down to the White House. He said the Americans do not know. There just didn't seem any plan, which seemed at the time very strange to me. Is it fair to say that's always been a problem?
Yeah, that's always been a problem, and looking even geographically, Europe is more natural alliance for Ukraine, yes. So in Europe should be more bothered about their own and our own safety and security than United States. Because if before United States has the strategy of global influence, you can find an interconnection with their strategy and you can sell them something. Like why you need to take care about Ukraine, about Europe. But if now the official strategy actually is to isolate America, why they should be caring about that? And it was a problem from the very beginning. It was something which never be liked in Ukraine as long as it takes, because from Ukrainian point of view it sounds a little bit cynical, because as long as it takes for you, it's just the time. For us, it's the human lives. Well, you can lose whatever people you want, as long as the last Ukrainian is alive, we will support you, which doesn't sound good. Mm-hmm. That's why it never fits into our best picture, but sometimes you can change something, sometimes you need to agree to understanding that you will need time to change. So we come to the point when all our allies, they do not understand what to do next, because this strategy didn't work. Obviously, there would be no ceasefire. Everyone understands it. We just came from Brussels, spoke with a lot of officials. All of them do understand that there would be no ceasefire.
Do understand it now, you're saying?
Yes, now. And the question, what could be a strategy in which you're afraid to invest and you have motivation and you can keep motivation to invest? And actually, this is the position where we decided to propose our idea, because at least we see some way out. And that's this strategic neutralization concept, which we try to demonstrate now. And
could you explain the strategic neutralization concept? Nice bit of kind of quasi-military political jargon there.
Yes.
What's the plan that you're trying to sell?
The plan is that, looking at the lessons learned from this war, we see some examples where Ukraine works well even without defeating Russia in conventional classical way. So the Black Sea is one of the good examples where we see that the Russian fleet still exists. So they technically have ships, they have personnel, they have command and control system, they have bases, they have some kind of capabilities, but they cannot implement their main tasks which they were created for. They cannot make an economic blockade, they cannot make an amphibious operations. Actually, amphibious capabilities for now, they destroyed completely in Russian naval component, in the Black Sea. So practically they do have all these massive ships, expensive, but they cannot do anything with this from the point of control of the operational domain. And Ukraine did it with very non-standard means, because we didn't have a fleet actually, and we have some small piece which was destroyed immediately by Russians or by us, because we didn't want them to go to Russians, and that's it. And we did it with non-standard means, with unmanned system, with the combination of the denial components from the land components. And actually what one of your ministers of defense called it was a functional defeat.
James Heapy?
Yes, James Heapy, yes, correct. So that was a functional defeat, not conventional, but functional. They cannot do their function. And we thought that maybe we can apply the same approach to any other domains. If we can reach the functional defeat of Russia in all the other domains, actually they will have army, they will have command and control in all the formal capabilities, but they cannot implement their goals. And that could be a state, if this functional defeat would be quite sustainable, that could be a state in which we can exist as an independent state with the economy, when we can start recovery, when we can start rework of the economy, which will then bring people back, involve investments from the West. So because all the plans of the recovery, which we have now in European Union, for example, it also was connected to the state of peace. What would be that we will do something after the ceasefire with the recovery, with the restoration of Ukrainian economy. But if we don't have a formal ceasefire, or if we don't have a ceasefire at all, shall we just decrease an economy and die in an attrition war, or we need to create some kind of more or less stable security situation in which we can not only simply live, but we can increase our capabilities. And we think that this is functional defeat in many domains can provide us this some kind of more or less sustainable security situation, which will allow Ukraine to develop itself and to recover itself.
Okay, so let me just see if I can summarize that back to you to see if I've got the right idea. So the idea is you redefine the objective, which is not a formal end to the war necessarily.
Yes, even not the formal ceasefire.
Even not a formal ceasefire, so the war is continuing, but what you do is you kind of replicate on land and in the air what has happened in the Black Sea. So you deprive the Russians of their offensive capability.
Yes.
And even if the war is formally continuing, even if Putin is still throwing things at Ukraine, you achieve a degree of stability.
Yes.
And that becomes a goal, a kind of victory in a way. Okay, how do you achieve that? Let's start with the land domain.
There could be different variations how to achieve that, but with land domain, what we see now is that we have a huge front line, like 1,200 kilometers. It's only eastern part, east-south. We do not take even here into account the sea front line, whatever it means, and all the other Belarusian part. So it's huge, but actually clashes we have only on some spots of that. For now on, Russia is not able to create tension even in 3 spots. They usually concentrate at one. They know it was this like a summer offense. They started to press on Donbas and Sumy, and finally they withdraw from Sumy direction to Donbas. They replace the troops because they cannot do it simultaneously in 2 places. So that demonstrates that they don't have so many forces. They still have them much more than Ukrainians do in infantry, but they don't have them enough to create the tension on the front line all over. And we have the examples of those brigades who created the more or less stable zones on the front line. Mainly this is done with so-called kill zone. So this is the zone which is controlled by different equipment, drones, for example, FPV drones. When they use the FPV drones to eliminate infantry and equipment, they do not allow the clashes on the land. So you don't need face infantry, you just kill them within the zone of 10, 15, 20 kilometers.
So within 10, 15, 20 kilometers of the line of contact, there's so many Ukrainian drones flying around, the Russians just can't concentrate troops, can't get close.
Can't get closer, you just cannot get closer with equipment as people, and you don't have a clashes, and this zone sometimes now up to 40 kilometers on some.
Are you able to say where along the line? What are the examples of that?
As soon as the brigades are moving on, so it can be different situation each day, but from what we see, it's 10 minimum, 40 maximum. This is something which is kept. On those zones where are the clashes, it means that we don't have enough capacity of these drones. So something is going wrong. So actually the situation is now that should we have this, for example, kill zone all over the front line of 40 kilometers, there would be already no clashes, but still would be reachable but Russian drones, Russian artillery and so on. But if you have this killing zone, for example, 80 kilometers or 100 kilometers, that's completely changed the course of war. It means that there is no infantry at all on the clashes on the land. There is mainly no artillery because 100 to 150 it's non-reachable. So that's like a different type of war absolutely which we create, where Ukraine has not so many disadvantages. So in some moves we have more advantage because we are more advanced in drones production, we are more advanced in technological circles, so that's like something which we can do. And if we do this on the land, it means that we at least stabilize the situation in such a way that we're not worrying about summer offensive of infantry in Donbas, because we can control it with other means. And actually this is very doable because we have this capacity now in production, in development, which should control this operational zone. It's not yet massive, but we know solutions.
Require, I'm assuming, just a massive scaling up of production of UAVs and also of operators and all of that in order to create a kind of a drone war?
Yeah.
I've heard that term before.
Before we have operating one drone, now we have these massive drone operators, so you can just do groups, and there are different technologies which operate with the group of drone, and the technology and the operational approach, operational concept is changing. And the good stuff is that Ukraine started to transform the command structure inside the Ukrainian army, and brigades started to be transformed in corps. And actually, what we see from good signs now, that the best brigades, who has the most advanced technologies and approach to this creating of this skill zone, they becoming leaders of this creating of corps. So they increasing and transforming these best practices on much bigger amount of people, on much bigger amount of units, and they will control bigger territory.
So you're bundling in a number of brigades around one of the very good brigades, and that brigade teaches and extends to the others.
Creating the procedures, approaches, and so on. And that's something which can be done on land. It will transform land operations.
How do you extend this kill zone beyond that kind of 20, 30, 40 kilometer range, which I believe is basically dictated by the current range of FPV drones?
This is a little bit different type of UAVs. Yes, so if we speak about 40 kilometers, this is FPV drones, like a small one. If we speak about 40 plus kilometers, this is like a plane type UAVs with different technologies, with different system of navigation, because GPS and jamming and spoofing is completely working on the front line. So that's a little bit different type of construction, a little bit different type of the equipment. But this is not equipment which exists. It requires now cleaning up of the technology and production, and then scaling. You're absolutely right that from what I hear when I speak with the producers of this type of UAVs, they were saying that they're absolutely sure that till the end of the year, a solution for 150 kilometers would be ready.
By the end of this year?
By the end of this year, yes. So this is already in massive research. Not only research, but prototyping. So they're testing the different.
Okay, so that means that the technology will be ready by the end of the year, and then it could be scaled.
Yes. Then, of course, scaling much depends on money. Money much depends on Europeans, actually now, Europeans or UK. And this is where we can be in collaboration, because no Europe, no UK has these technologies of the modern warfare, drone warfare now. You could be interested in investing in that production with joint ventures, and this is where this collaboration should happen to make this scaling as soon as possible.
Okay, so that's the concept for stabilizing the front line on the ground. What about the air? We are speaking the night after the largest single air attack of the war on Kyiv last night, but the previous largest ever attack was only a week before that, and they've been getting bigger and bigger.
And I think that this period they will even increase because of all the talks of Trump and decisions to stop the Patriot supplies.
What's your concept for imposing this? Was it functional defeat on the Russians in the air?
So the air is now a very complicated also element, because it became multi-layer dimension. Before, the more jets and more advanced jets you have, you can control the air. Now it's like a completely different situation with these drones, with Shaheds, with all this type of the long-range strikes capabilities, which both sides have. One solution could be against drones, which we massively suffer, and other solutions against missiles, and the third solution against the ballistics. With missiles, we more or less have all these European systems of air defense, which intercept. You can change the tactics, but there is already existing instruments. With drones, we don't have yet the good solution now on the ground, which is operating, because the previous approach do not work as soon as the attacks became very massive. You just cannot handle it. But actually, the point is to create the interceptors, drones against drones, or a small type like missiles against drones, which are cheaper and more operative. And again, all those technologies are under the testing or some kind of research now. So we can reach this technology in a very short period. And then again, we come to the positioning of scaling up. which doesn't mean that the problem is solved forever, because this is very fast and frequent cycle of technological change, but at least to find the solution against the current tactics of Russian.
Is there a timescale on that?
There are already interceptors which are working. We already have massive video of drones interceptors. So that means that the scaling is already going on. I think that, again, we can speak about till the end of the year, there would be visible change in situation. And ballistic missiles is the biggest problem, because for now the only solution we have is our Patriot. We all dependent on Americans. Americans stopped supplies of the Patriot's missiles. You see immediately the behavior of Russians, that they will try now. That's why I'm saying that I expect increasing of attacks, because they will try to take out all of our storage of the missiles we do have for now as fast as possible. And actually the problem is that Europe doesn't have a solution. Ukraine obviously is not able to create in the short term anti-ballistic solution. So this is the weakest point, and we need to work out on that. There are some possible ways of going out, but what is principle that this is the gap not only for Ukraine, but this is the gap for Europe. Now Americans behave like that towards Ukraine. No one can guarantee that they won't behave the same towards Europe. This is not the Ukrainian problem. This is the problem for the whole Europe, which they need to cover. And this should be a solution which covers Europe and Ukraine. Final issue when we don't have a clear vision how to do that, but at least it gives the direction what could be a priority of putting the effort in from the point of view of fast solution, which doesn't mean that we need to stop to speak to Americans about that. But the idea is that if we demonstrate to Americans also that, okay, here is the pie, we, together with Europeans, cover most of this pie. We do understand how to deal with that. You need to help us within some period to cover the smallest piece of it, but very crucial and important. And then we will have the result. Maybe in this more rational conversation, Trump administration will think, oh, that's reasonable, because we want to reach this state which will give us and you some kind of these benefits. And that could be very specific and argumented talks to them, which will at least stabilize for a short period and give the floor for development of some alternative approach and technologies.
You've given me a concept of, well, I suppose not of exactly a victory, but a concept of
neutralization.
Of something to aim for.
Yeah.
And you've explained how to get there. It seems like that was based on a premise of, well, the Russians aren't going to stop and there isn't going to be a ceasefire, and you can't assume that they're going to stop. Mm-hmm. And I jumped the gun a little bit earlier, and I kind of said, and the Americans are out of the game. Is that also your assumption? It sounds like that's what you're assuming.
Yeah. I think that we need to behave like classical military, which I'm surprised that this now not prevailing mindset. But you need to plan the worst scenario. If there would be a better scenario, it's fine. You're lucky. And our feeling is that Americans will be out not only with Ukraine, but with Europe. And my feeling is that they will be out also with UK, but on a little bit later stages. And I think that Europeans also recognize it now, because it seems that the main efforts are put not in trying to engage them back, but trying to slow up the speed of their giving up Europe. So the Europeans have a time frame for being more ready. With UK, I don't see yet this move. I see that UK is still focused on these special relations and rely too much on that special relations and expect special relations with US. I do understand all the interconnection on the military base, equipment base, but that's what is for now, and I think that UK also need to think the alternative strategy. What if?
Do you find that frustrating, speaking to your British counterparts?
We passed through many phases of frustration for this year. That nothing can surprise us. This is not the worst situation. In February 2022, it was much worse.
Let's work on the assumption that the Americans are out of the game. Mm-hmm. The Europeans have grasped that the Americans are withdrawing and all they can do is slow them down, but they're going. You're saying Britain isn't there yet. What do you make then of these messages that come out of White House the other way? So today, Donald Trump spoke to Volodymyr Zelensky, and we're told it was a very good conversation. And at the NATO summit just a few days ago, Donald Trump said they need air defence and we're going to see what we can do. Of course, after that, they cancelled the...
Yeah.
What do you make of that dichotomy in the messaging?
I don't think that we need to rely on any words in this situation. Obviously, for Trump, words means nothing. He can say something in like a emotional mood, and on the next day he will change his mind or forget about what he was saying. I don't think we can rely on some promises in that. Yeah, that could be that we can keep for some period his focus on something, his attention on something, but I don't have any trust, because this is not the strategy, this is not the approach, this is just daily mood, seems like. And we see that around him there are a lot of people who are obviously, I cannot say anti-Ukrainian, but they don't care, actually. And they think that they have a rational approach when they think that they need to make deals with stronger party, and as soon as they see Russia as a stronger party, they will think about making a deal.
I'm wondering what you think their motivation is, for example, for the sudden cancellation of these arms deliveries. Stuff that was on the tarmac in Poland, an hour's drive from the border, about to go in.
What we hear from our American colleagues with whom we're talking to, the current feeling in Washington is that Ukraine cannot win. It means that it has no reason to assist, because if there would be just the worst situation for Ukraine, why you need to spend the resources? Because again, this is about as long as it takes. No one knows as long as it takes. And they don't see this like a strategy. They don't see the tasks and goals and probability of reaching these goals. And they think that, okay, in this situation, Russia is bigger, they're stronger, they have some advance on the land, it means they will win. Why we need to assistance to the party which is losing? And so that's one of the issues. Can we convince them in different mood? At least we can try.
Is that part of the reason for your strategy?
Yes.
You've explained the strategy to me. You've just explained why it would be important to try and sell it to the Americans. Whether they buy it or not, I don't know. But what about the Ukrainian government, Zelensky, etc.? Because you guys are a think tank, you're not the government. Is this something that has official endorsement from Kyiv? Can we say that this is the Ukrainian strategy now?
No, that's obviously not some kind of official strategy now. We try also to deliver this to government. We try to speak to them. We try to distribute the idea. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We'll see how successful that would be, but we still see a lot of chances for success, because actually this is some kind of natural way Ukraine is moving on now. So with this killing zone, this is not something which was invented in cabinets and then implemented on land. It actually appeared on battlefield, started to be as a best visible practice, and now it seems to be the answer on the question. Black Sea the same. There were no complex strategy. We said that how we destroy the Russian control over the Black Sea. No, that was some kind of practical steps which suddenly rise into the concept which seems to be workable. And so Ukraine anyway is moving that direction, intuitively, let's say, without claiming this as a strategy. So that's why we think that there is a high chance that government, when it will see it as a complex approach, will generally accept it. We are not speaking about official acknowledgement of such strategies, because it has no sense, no at Ukrainian level, no at European level. It would take ages to approve some strategy. But if that would be a dominant idea in Europe and in Ukraine, then at least it will give a shape for why we are doing this and how we can reach the state.
Let's go to our final thoughts then. Adley, where do you want to start?
Sure, mine is really short today. In the many strikes that have come onto Ukraine and onto Kyiv, I just want to flag that our friends at Pen Ukraine, their warehouse has been stricken and damaged. They've been publishing photos on social media, so I'll be in touch with them and I will update on how they're doing. It seems like no one was hit. Everybody seems safe. It was the warehouse where they keep all the books. But I just want to flag that because obviously we're very close to them. We've had them many times on the podcast and we visit them every time we go to Kyiv. And I think it's worth mentioning. And that's it for me.
Thanks very much, Adley. Dom, where do you want to leave listeners today?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. I'm sorry to go back to that last point, but just one absolute final point on that. There's a war here, right? So what does this new thing do? Does it reassure Ukraine? Does it deter Russia? If the answer to those is no, then why are you doing it? I mean, in the normal scheme of things, fine, have this new headquarters and all this new stuff, but it's serious days now, guys. Well, what does this do? Anyway, enough on that. My final thought, I would like to point people near the great city of Manchester, if you're around there and you're not all still wearing your bucket hats from the Oasis gig, I'd like to point you to a new film, a film called This Is Also Ukraine. It was created by 10 Ukrainian teenagers living, in Ukraine, close to the front lines. Filmed in spring of this year, it's said to offer an unfiltered glimpse of joy, rage, creativity, grief and love. They say they've made a bold, poetic expression of what it means to be young and alive in a time of war. I'd like to thank producer Yena Olmytchenko for chatting to me earlier in the week about this. This film is going to premiere on Sunday, July 13th, Sunday coming up, 5 p.m. to 6:30. The venue is The Hall, the Aviva Studios in Manchester. Tickets are free, but you do need to book through Factory International. We'll put a link in the episode notes. Please don't go along. It's a free film. It's going to be screened and then there's going to be a conversation with some of the artists. So if you're near Manchester, please do go and have a look at This Is Also Ukraine. And thanks again to Yena for chatting to me about it.
Don't look back in anger, Dom. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Dom Nichols and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine Live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Durnley, Louisa Wells, and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.